Welcome back to the Unanimous Decision Podcast. I am your host, DPalm. Follow me on Twitter at DPalm66. Follow the show on Twitter at UDPod. Follow the entire MTR network at the MTR Network. And welcome to 2018's Podcast Week. For the uninitiated, Podcast Week is when I take way too much time out of my life and record 5 podcasts in 5 days and release them to you. Today, we're kicking it all off with our UGA preview, guest starring former tag team partner of yours truly, the former co-host of Doogee Podcast, Chad Floyd. What up, Chad?
Not too much, man. Still the host of Doogee Podcast, although it is, given the circumstances of our other co-host, it is hard to get that thing back off the ground. But I appreciate your consistency and your dedication to the craft. Yeah, I'm doing great, but for what I told you right before we started recorded an hour and 13-minute UNC football preview for TarHeelBlog.com's Weekly Tar Heel, and realized I only got 14 minutes of audio out of it.
And that's why we have backup recorders now running at all times here at the DPalm headquarters. I got to ask, Chad, so that's kind of why I wanted to shine the spotlight on the Carolina work. I wasn't aware of what was still going on with Doogee Podcast. How is working with the Carolina blog been?
It's been great, man. I've got pretty much at this point solid editorial freedom where, they don't really check me on things I write, so I can get a little bit weird if I want to. And at some point, they decided that they wanted to go a different direction with the podcast, and they said, "Hey, Chad, you've done this before." So I have learned to have a newfound appreciation for all the recording and editing that you did on the back end in the early days of being crazy, because my God, dude, it's it has been trial and error, and it hasn't been perfect, but I don't understand how people who are smart, not nearly as smart as you and I, get that figured out as quickly as they do.
It's wild because people don't realize like how much recording a conversation is fun and it's great, but there's a lot of stuff, especially if you want to go for consistency, that you have to do in the back end. And 14 minutes of an hour and 14-minute podcast probably not going to cut it. Let's talk about your love for Georgia, because everyone knows you're UNC grad, very proud undergrad, but you did some time on Athens too, didn't you?
Yeah, man, a year and a half living right downtown, going out 6 nights a week and still getting a 4.0. That's what I call absolutely wonderful hustle. And also just, how can you not love a place that gives you all A's while you are pretty much always drunk? It's a glorious place to live.
We have to give a little moment here for let the SEC chants die down. The listeners obviously are chanting alongside. It's very interesting to see the path that got you to be a Georgia fan, but I'm glad to have you aboard because there's not many more people I enjoy talking about football with, especially UGA football. But before we get into it, I want to tell everyone who is just now joining us what Podcast Week's going to be. Like I said, today is Monday. You're listening to the UGA preview with myself and Chad Floyd. On Tuesday, we'll have our Power 5 preview. We're going to go through all big Power 5 conferences, including some sleepers that you may not know, with Michael Felder. Then on Wednesday, dropping will be the AFC preview. We'll talk runners. We'll make fun of some teams. And I've got on my old left tackle and soon to be married human being, Barso. Then on Thursday, I don't know how I keep inviting Nada back on the network, but he keeps finding his way back onto the podcast. We're going to be talking NFC. And after what Cam Newton sunning Kelvin Benjamin before the game, I've got tons of jokes. And on Friday will be our annual Summer Sam preview. It'll involve myself. It'll involve Sam Franco. It'll involve Rich Fan and Cam Hawkins, both of the PW Torch Network. But today, we're proud to bring you the UGA preview. And we can't talk about where we're going until we talk about where we've been. Chad, there are people who are going to tune in now who don't listen, who have not really gotten into the whole DPalm oeuvre, if you will, and will think that I'm going to come out here cockily and tell people why Georgia's going to be great because they fell just short of a missed offsides call and it was a game, okay? A thing happened, but it was a very close game. They could have won the national title. People are going to expect me to come out here guns blazing, horn sounding. You know me better than that. Last year was a goddamn fluke.
Are you going with that?
I have to. I am 33 years old. I've watched a lot of Georgia seasons. Last year, with a rookie quarterback, with a freshman quarterback, excuse me, that wasn't supposed to happen last year. Last year was an anomaly. This was supposed to be the year we were supposed to be competing for something. Last year was supposed to be the set the table for what's next. We were ahead of schedule last year, and that for me makes me very nervous for what happens this year.
I don't think you should be nervous at all. I think that is just a year early proof of concept, which is honestly just horrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just look at it from a numbers perspective, other than the Notre Dame game, Georgia won every game by at least four. Let's see, the South Carolina was the next closest game at 14 points. Beyond that, you're looking three scores in every game. They weren't just edging by people and, a couple breaks away from 8-5. They were murdering people. And
yeah, but and I know you're right, and I know you know what you're talking about, and you're one of those people who didn't grow up a Georgia fan, so you're able to be a bit more objective than I am, and I've always appreciated that in your voice. But let's be real here. Some things broke Georgia's way last year, particularly the falling apart of the SEC East. That you can't really expect to become a trend, can you?
I mean, Florida and Tennessee will be better than they were last year eventually. I don't know if that's going to be the case anytime in the absolute immediate future. But the SEC East is just kind of trash. And that is a whole lot of fun right now because you're really looking at it and it's like whichever is the worst division in the ACC right now, except you have Georgia on top of it as well. But I mean, it was just there for the taking and Georgia took it with a bullet. And I don't really see, I mean, Florida is obviously going to be the name program that will eventually come back. And Dan Mullen had Mississippi State punching above its historical weight at Mississippi State, but I don't know if he quite has the cachet to elevate Florida back to that level. But, they could be a top 15 to 20 program, I mean, by mid-September.
I think you're 100% right. I think that I'm just a little burned from last year because if you go back and listen to the podcast last year, you can hear the trepidation in my voice. You can hear the holes that I thought this team had, and the team kept stepping up and proving me wrong. It's amazing that in the year of our Lord 2018, I'm going into a Georgia football season looking at a preseason ranking of 4 and getting incredulous. I never thought I'd be here.
It's an interesting place to be, and I mean, you're a Falcons fan, you're an Atlanta sports fan, so the last 30 minutes of the last 30 minutes of the season can kind of leave a taste in your mouth to where you realize we're just doing Georgia shit again. But this just feels different, man. It just feels different, and I could be completely wrong, and they could go 9-4 this year, and Kirby Smart could be out the door in 3 years, but I just don't see it.
Yeah, I
don't see how that's humanly possible.
I've got to agree with you. The offseason saw some major changes down in the Classic City. Let's talk about the offensive losses first. Obviously, the 2-star tailbacks, Chubb and Michelle. That was it. That was to say that there was a thunder and lightning, if you will, tandem. That was the tandem. And as Sony Michelle kind of asserted himself down the stretch and the play calling more suited his running style, I think it was easy to forget the 4 years of service and the amazing amount of yards and amazing amount of big carries that Chubb had. It's a lot of holes to fill, but we've seen them start to get filled in the offseason and in prior seasons in backup control. Let's also talk about we had some losses on the O-line, and we might have a loss under center depending on who gets the start. It's interesting to see that this offense, while not coming back in full, feels kind of like a strength of this team in a way entering a season we haven't seen really in this decade.
Yeah, and I think the loss of Javon Wims is a big one as well. Leading receiver from last year and was kind of that outside threat that they don't really have. I mean, they've got speed on the outside, but outside of Riley really don't really have, kind of the big possession guy.
Right.
But, Isaiah Wynn, I mean, he's just a testament to Sam Pittman's coaching on the offensive line because, he was a decent player for his first couple of years, but just exploded and became a first-round pick as a senior. And, to me, what that says is that these guys are just, from year 1 to year 2 under Kirby Smart, under Pittman, under the rest of the staff, they all improved so much that I'm not really worried about losing one offensive lineman when you bring back Gaylord at center, and you bring back Baker and Cleveland at the guard positions, and Andrew Thomas, a guy who was a true freshman, started 12 games at one of the tackle spots. If there's that kind of improvement from year one to year two, every year on the line, they're going to be absolutely dominant.
It was so wild for me doing the research for this podcast that I looked at just losing Win. I was like, wait a second, we just lost Win? And obviously, the guys in the backfield are some very special talents, but the holes that were created up front, particularly like you've worked with me long enough to know what a strong motor I am about Georgia's offensive line play. Yep. And last year, it was you didn't hear me complain about it because it was so good by and large. There were obviously mistakes because these are college kids, but you watch the play not just improve as the season went on, but improve as games would go on, which speaks to the conditioning because when their guys are tired and our guys aren't, those holes get even bigger and the runs get even peeled off even longer.
And here was the thing, man. They were so bad in 2016.
People don't get that. Like, people don't seem to understand how bad this line was 2 years ago. And the fact that like, oh, 4 back, let's do this, is a huge testament to the coaching.
And what you have to say is it took him a year to shake that Schottenheimer off of him.
Your words. I'm still somehow. I had brainwashed myself into Schottenheimer that it's hard for me to brainwash myself out. I'll get there, but it was an ugly thing for me. I'm not proud of it.
Man, my favorite college football podcast is Podcast Ain't Played Nobody with Stephen Godfrey and Bill Connolly. Connolly probably once every 3 or 4 episodes, if Mark Richt comes up, it's automatic that he's making a Schottenheimer joke. And this is like one of the most level-headed football analysts that I know. But if he's making the joke once a month, then I'm going to make it every chance I get.
He didn't want to hire Schottenheimer. We all know this. He wanted to keep Bobo. They wouldn't give Bobo the raise. Anyway.
Yeah.
Let's go to the defense, where it looks like if you look at it on paper, you say, oh, my God, 8 guys left. There's a lot of holes to fill. What are we going to do? Roquan Smith is a machine. And I'm not going to be the podcast that downplays the loss of Roquan Smith. Not here, not now.
No, he was absolutely transformative. I mean, that's the type of player that, it's rare to have a defense that you can build around one guy. You used to see it with a dominant defensive tackle, before defensive tackles started being dominant, or, like a Michael Strahan type or something. Roquan Smith was an absolute difference maker in the middle of the field, sideline to sideline, in on every play. And if I'm going to be optimistic, he wasn't great as a sophomore, but was transformative last year. I don't know if we have another guy that can come close to replicating him.
No.
But my God, let's just pour one out for what a beast Roquan Smith was last year.
It's one of those things where I was in my little SEC corner on my podcast all year telling everyone how he was the best linebacker in the nation. And then when he hit that hit against Oklahoma and the world noticed, I was like, I told you. And not like I was saying anything controversial or crazy. It was just one of those things where it's just vindication for something that you've known was right for a very long time. And I'll feel that same feeling when the season totals on Sony Michel and Saquon Barkley come out at the end of the year. And if that doesn't happen, I will delete this part from the podcast.
Oh man, I absolutely went in on that. I forget what podcast it was. It might have been this one. Just comparing Michel to Barkley from their stats last year.
Sure, yeah, take Barkley. That's fine. You give the Patriots Sony Michel. Awesome.
Yeah.
Great decision.
Yeah, give the Patriots a guy who is worth about 2 yards more per carry.
I honestly do not understand what this league does sometimes. Sometimes you need to draft a player to keep him. You gave Bill Belichick Sony Michel. Congratulations, you played yourself.
Meanwhile, the Seahawks are drafting the dude out of San Diego State too.
All right, so let's talk about the defense. 8 players lost, but I'll tell you what, man, I'm a believer in Mel Tucker's defense. I'm a believer in the recruiting. I'm a believer in what you see what that defense was able to do, like as far as adjusting to a new set of play calls, a new scheme, a new very mentality on the field in 1 year. This is now like a year of kids that are not just indoctrinated, but after seeing the successes of last year, they've bought in. You've got players coming back who made contributions last year. DeAndre Baker, who is not the best corner in the SEC, but I enjoy watching him play because he's so physical.
He is absolutely not a guy that you want to mess with as a receiver. He gets under you and really just You know, his cover skill, like you said, his cover skills aren't great. His ball skills aren't great, but he just mauls people, man.
You
And
can't catch the ball if you can't get off the line. That's just math.
yeah, and the fun part of it is I'm looking at his backup, and it's a guy who's 6'3", 211 and listed as a corner.
Yes, please. I'll take more of those. Like,
Yeah,
and that's the thing I've really like. And doing the preview for the defense, it was so funny because I was like, so we're Bama East. We're just gonna recruit these giant fucking corners. We're gonna have an exceedingly fast linebacking core. And right now, my biggest question is that basically that whole new defensive line. I think the strength of this defense last year was obviously the backers in the secondary, but that was precipitated by how much activity and strength and push you're able to get out of your front. Will we think these new faces be able to generate the same kind of pressure?
on the defensive line, I'm not quite as worried as you. You really only lose Trent Thompson and John Atkins, both of whom obviously, like you said, occupied the space to where the linebackers could get free and make plays. I think if you lose guys though, like Davin Bellamy and Reggie Carter and Roquan Smith and Lorenzo Carter, you know, the guys that are cleaning up for everybody occupying blocks. I mean, Roquan, you can't really replicate, as we just discussed. Lorenzo, his physical talent, you can't really replicate, and he obviously came along late in the year last year. But, you know, to me, I wonder if Natchez Patrick can get his head on straight and become, you know, the guy this year. DeAndre Walker was excellent last year, but then the other two linebacker spots are really where I'm most worried if I'm going to point to anything. But defensive line, you're looking two juniors and a senior across the starting spots, and then I know we're going to touch on it later, but the recruiting that's behind them. I mean, there's going to be plenty of talent on the defensive line.
Oh, we're definitely going to talk about it because Tyson Campbell's coming in, and I think he's going to play sooner than later as a corner, or they'll find somewhere for him. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. The special teams, nothing's really changed. No real big losses there. We've got we'll talk about when we do the breakdown as far as what's coming back there. Recruiting, you touched on it, Chad. So in my 33 years as a Georgia fan, roughly, this is a level of recruiting that's I've never seen. And we all know I'm not a big recruit guy. I believe in you once you do it on a Saturday. However, I would be remiss if I didn't point out things are trending a certain way. And so the Bama East comparisons continue because not only because I think Mark Richt is someone who took Georgia's recruiting profile national. It went from regional to national. You could recruit anywhere. What's happened now is you can recruit anywhere and you're the edgy alternative to the establishment. When Georgia's the cool kids in the room next to Bama, like, you see what's happening. Bama's losing recruits to Georgia. It's nuts.
A lot of recruits.
It's unfathomable to me. Like, when I'm watching, like, you know, I try to stay the fuck away from this because they're 18-year-old children and you should let them make decisions best for them. But I can't ignore it anymore. Like, kids are coming out of the woodwork saying, I want to be a Bulldog from places that I was like, wait, we can recruit out there?
Yeah, we pulled a 5-star running back for next year. I'm just looking at the 2019 class, which obviously has no impact on this year. They pulled a running back out of Louisiana, 5 stars. Like, that's not something
running backs don't leave Louisiana. So this is like, there are people who aren't really familiar with like recruiting. Louisiana is one of those places that's always been talent rich, but felt like there were very big borders up, like Miami in the 80s, South Florida. It was one of those things where if a kid doesn't go to LSU, one, there might be a red flag, or two, he's probably going to Texas. It really wasn't, Georgia's rosters aren't exactly Louisiana heavy over the past 20 years. And there's a very good reason for that because LSU's been very, very good at not just building, but cultivating a generation who says, I want to be a Tiger.
And the thing is, in basketball, you can have a class with like 4 or 5 top 20 guys and it'd be fairly normal because you have it's stratified to a point where you have a Kentucky or a Duke who does that. Georgia had 7 top 30 guys in the recruiting class that's coming in for 2018. They had 8 if you expand that to 40. They had 9 if you expand that to 51. So of the top 51 players in the country, according to 24/7 Sports, who I guess is as good a source of any, Georgia has roughly a fifth of the best players in the country coming in. I mean, it's beyond anything I've ever seen.
I've been trying to like soft pedal this all off season, but like doing the research, I'm almost giddy and a little worried because once expectations are kind of this high, what can Georgia do except to meet them? And that's the one thing I will say that Kirby Smart and I'm very well. You guys have all the recordings. I am a Rick truther. I do think that all this story ends with the Miami Georgia national title game in the next 2 years because I love what he's doing down there, and I'm sure you know more about that than I do. But it's a situation where Kirby's better at the thing that I didn't think was as important for Rick, and that was projecting greatness. Because I thought Rick's operated in a way that he projected humanity.
Yeah.
And if you talk to the former players, that's always kind of what bleeds through. But he wasn't as great at the bombast and making the big splash. And maybe that, and you could say, oh, he's doing it better at Miami. Well, I think at Miami he's got a more accommodating athletic department.
Well, the thing, and having had personal interactions with Rick twice since he left from Miami, I mean, he was always a little bit on edge at Georgia, I think, but he is just completely being himself at Miami. I mean, he had the sandwich diagram last year at the ACC kickoff, and this year, all he wanted to talk about was how he did his Thanksgiving leftovers. Like he just wants to be laid back, Mark Richt, let everybody go recruit South Florida for him, and just kind of hang out and be a dude, and it's working for him. And I'm happy for Rick that worked out, but it's working out for Georgia too.
Oh, it's working out beautifully for Georgia. I think it's interesting that you say that because I do think that a lot of the fan expectation at Georgia really it can weigh on a coach. And good, bad, or indifferent, I think Kirby Smart, coming from that pressure cooker that was Bama, that is Bama, he came here and said the pressure's not high enough yet. And he wanted to crank it up, and he kind of took that challenge on. And you're seeing the benefits in recruiting because, hey, it is pretty easy to get a kid to go to Bama with greatness. You know what's a lot easier? Athens, which is an hour and a half away from Atlanta. Tuscaloosa is Tuscaloosa.
And Athens is a little bit more fun than Tuscaloosa.
You said it. I've had enough fun in Tuscaloosa. I've had way more fun in Athens. I wasn't going to say it because I'm not sure the statute of limitations is up on everything quite yet.
That's a fair point. And just, one last thing on the recruiting front. Rick's biggest shortcoming was kind of the offensive line and receivers, in my opinion. Smart's got 2 5-star receivers locked up for next year. He had 3 5-star offensive linemen come in last year, including Andrew Thomas, who started 15 games. Isaiah Wilson, who redshirted last year, he's slated to start at left tackle potentially. And then they brought in 3 more guys who are in the top 5 of their offensive line class for last year. So it's going to be kind of amazing to see what with Sam Pittman and 5-star talent across the line. I mean, you or I could run for 1,000 yards probably in 2020 behind this line.
It's going to be because Rick was always able to get the top end quarterback talent. That's what he does. He's a quarterback.
Yeah, he's a quarterback guy.
And I think you're right. I think that watching the more almost well-rounded recruiting, because we're still getting top quarterbacks, but because we have so much more cachet in the public eye right now, it's not a build. It's not a slow build. It's a strike while the iron's hot. We're hot right now. Let's get these kids in. Let's lock them up and lock them down. Let's talk about the team that we're going to be watching on the field this fall on Saturdays. Offensively, starting up front, like you said, bringing back 4 or 5 starters. I think we can agree that probably the strength of this offense is going to be that offensive line.
Yeah, they're going to maul people. It's definitely a good place to start with the strength of the offense, and I'm not down on the running backs despite losing 2 of the best running backs in Georgia history. But we'll get to that.
Yes, sir. And I know we covered it in kind of the leading part, but it's kind of remarkable how much talent they brought back and how well this talent's been developed in the last 12 months. Like, I remember we did this preview last year, and I was very wary of this offensive line because 2016 was a trebuchet mockery. And every week I was like, a little bit better, a little bit better. Oh, a lot bit better. Oh, a little stumble up. But by the end of the season, by time for things to get really real, you're right. The word mauling comes into play because not only was this team bigger, faster, and stronger, but by the end of the season, they had enough tread in the tires to just absolutely. But watch the second half of the Oklahoma game. Look at those holes. Watch what they're doing to the Oklahoma defensive line. It's not schematic. They're just hitting them a lot.
Well, I mean, to me, watch the first Auburn game, then watch the second Auburn game.
That's that's an amazing point.
That's 3 weeks. And it was night and day. And then you see that same offensive line, like you said, dominating Oklahoma. I mean, I was even down 17 points. I knew Georgia was going to get back in that game because they were ripping off 8 yards a carry. More than that. Didn't they finish with like 13 yards? I don't know. But then against Alabama, they weren't getting, 2 yards in a cloud of dust. They were getting explosive plays along with, a couple of negative plays because, fucking Alabama. But yeah, like they're moving the ball on every defense you could possibly move the ball on. I mean, the final boss at this point is Clemson and what they bring back on the defensive line. And I'm willing to bet that Georgia might have a shot at them this year.
It's crazy to say. Let's go, like you said, to the backfield next. Running backs, obviously, we have the big losses, but I have always called, and people can listen to the podcast. I've always said historically, say what you will about other cities, other schools, tailback U resides in Athens. And you can even go recent legacy, no Sean to Todd to the bevy of backs that just keep coming out of here. This is a reload, not rebuild situation. Yeah, Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel are gone. DeAndre Swift is there. Zamir White's coming in. And let's not forget about that young man, Holyfield.
Well, here's my thing. You have Gurley and Marshall come in. Marshall's the number one back in the country. Gurley, ends up being just amazing. Chubb and Michelle's the number one back in the country. And for the first, probably year and a half, it manifested itself that Chubb was actually the guy. Although I would argue that it ended up a little more balanced.
Oh, yeah.
Zamir White and James Cook feels like that same situation to me. James Cook's Dalvin Cook's brother. If you put Dalvin Cook in the Georgia backfield, first of all, look out. But then you have Zamir White, who's the number one back in the country. Then you have DeAndre Swift, who's already proof of concept back there. Georgia's not hurting for running backs. You have Brian Herrien and Holyfield, who you touched on as well. It's embarrassing, man. It's embarrassing how many good running backs Georgia has.
It's wild because recruiting wise, like you said, even under Rick, they're bringing in a pair of top guys, and they're able to sell these running backs on. Hey, and if I'm recruiting, this is my pitch. Hey, come here, come be featured back, but don't have to carry this weight alone. And also, look at that O-line.
Yeah, prolong your career by not running it 300 times over 13 games, and be part of something awesome. And then, stay fresh in the fourth quarter and have your yards per carry at about 7.5. The NFL tends to look favorably upon that.
They smile upon the guys who can break a team's back in the fourth quarter. And that's what this Georgia – if there's one thing you learn to say, hey, look, Georgia just takes great running backs and puts them in a good position, you can say that. You can think that. I disagree. If you can say there's one lesson that Georgia running backs have always been taught, finish your opponent.
Dude, DeAndre Swift, I started calling him finish him last year.
It's something unreal. It's like an attitude they tell them in the running back meeting room or something in the water, because these guys, like you used to see Chubb in those first 2 seasons when he would lower his head in the fourth quarter and you'd watch a defense like I don't want to hit him again. I'm so tired of getting hit by him.
Yeah.
And that's what these running backs do. Big, small, fast, between the tackles, they all deliver the hits. None of them receive the hits when they're running the ball, and that's the kind of aggressiveness you want to see. And the depth that you just spoke to says that, heaven forbid we have another knee apocalypse like in Neyland, it's going to be okay. There's the next guy up, and that mentality has always been so impressive. That's why the running backs continue to be my favorite position group at the University of Georgia on the offensive side of the ball. Let's talk about my least favorite position group on the offensive side of the ball, the goddamn wide receivers. Now, look, you have your standouts. You had your AJ years. Like, I'm not going to sit here and denigrate the history of Georgia receiving corps. But I look outside right now, the guys who are back, Nicole Hardeman, Terry Godwin, Riley Ridley, who I already mentioned, they're all fine.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think there's one great player. And with a quarterback situation that we're going to get to next that has a lot of question marks and a lot of inexperience, should we be concerned for what happens on the outside?
I think Mecole Hardman's going to be an absolute monster this year.
I think
He's
this year too. I agree.
I mean, he's a little bit more of your prototypical modern day slot receiver, but I mean, he's just so explosive,
Is
and
he taller than Riley Ridley?
I didn't catch that.
Is he taller than Riley Ridley?
No, Riley Ridley's at 6'2". I've got Hardman at 5'11". I mean,
Okay.
we would call him diminutive, but he didn't really start playing receiver exclusively until last year. So I think he's going to be a little bit crisper. Same could go for Terry Godwin, who has definitely shown flashes. The one-handed catch at Notre Dame. He's got a flair for the dramatic, but if he just gets a little bit more consistent, the potential's there, man. And Ridley too. They're all guys that all you really need is for one of them to draw double coverage, and then you also have the tight ends in Warner and Nauta who can, at least stretch the seams a little bit. But all you need is one to emerge, and it is just another mismatch for this Georgia offense.
All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the two elephants in the room, the quarterback situation. So last year, almost inexplicably, we handed the offense to a freshman. And lo and behold, Jake Fromm came out and did some things that I think that blew everyone away. And I have to give a shout out to my father-in-law. Susan is from Warner Robins, so I've heard about this kid since he was in high school, and I didn't believe it. And I was wrong. Because, yes, there were freshman mistakes last year. There were things that should have been done differently in big spots and big games. But by and large, for a true freshman to step onto that campus from small town Georgia and produce the way he did, I'm not going to take a damn thing away from Jake Fromm. He's got the talent and the physical abilities. Actually, I'd say the talent and the mentality more than anything else. The physical abilities is why we have a question. Because Justin Fields is a five-star recruit who came in early and is basically the Saban stopper. So what I've always said on this podcast is that the way you stop Nick Saban is you get a mobile quarterback. That's why he went out and got one of his own in Tutuola. And you look at Justin Fields and you see every quarterback that's ever beaten Nick Saban. That's why Kirby Smart recruited him. And with the mentality you've seen out of this program, a win now, not win then to proposition, I don't know how long Jake Fromm is for the world, and I didn't think I'd ever say that about a kid who took us to a national title game in his first year.
Man, and with Fromm last year, that was Jacob Eason's job, I'd say 60-40 before he got hurt, and Fromm more or less took it away by going to Notre Dame and winning.
He got Wally Pitts. But it happens.
But they absolutely had the training wheels on Fromm last year. There was one game in which Georgia attempted over 29 passes, and that was the Alabama game, which went to overtime. So you'll have that. But beyond that, 16 for 29 against Notre Dame. Then he attempts 15, 12, 17, and 14 passes the next four games. Attempted 7 passes against Florida, which is probably my favorite stat from last year.
It's my favorite stat from last year.
But, I mean, they had the training wheels on Fromm, and what he showed was that, by and large, he was a guy who could absolutely get it done, probably has more potential than your quote-unquote game manager that you saw at Alabama. But, basically, and right down to the number 11, looks like Aaron Murray has mastered the back shoulder throw as a freshman, which is really scary because that opens up a whole lot more options in the route tree. And I said the same thing about Eason versus Fromm last year, so I will end up eating my words on this. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Fromm might not have the upside, but I don't think he has the potential downside that going to Fields might.
I agree 100%. The only thing that worries me is that Mel Tucker and Kirby Smart were on staff when Deshaun Watson did what he did to that defense. And as they're building an Alabama East, they know what the weaknesses of this defense are, and because it's a two-gap system, there's no one to account for the quarterback. And they know who their likely competition is within the SEC. It is that school to the west in Tuscaloosa. They know how to attack it, and I'm afraid, particularly when we look at the schedule, which we're going to do in a second, the temptation for Justin Fields will be too great. The temptation to use, like, it's a situation where, like, I don't need the big gun, but I know the big gun will finish this. You know?
Yeah.
It's a situation where I'm with you. I think that as I ate the Jacob Eason crow last year, I think that this is Fromm's job. I think you're right with the open of that playbook. We're going to see a lot more interesting things, particularly with the versatility in that backfield and just that extra wrinkle that Justin Fields brings, that mobile quarterback. I don't know if obviously you can't redshirt him. You can't redshirt him because the threat has to be there. I think it's going to be a psychological element to every Georgia game this year. But I do think that playing him early and getting it from Fromm could be dangerous. We'll see what happens coming out of camp, but I don't think there's any reason on the face going into it that Fromm should lose his job. But again, you and I were very loud and very wrong last year, so we'll see what we see.
And I think with Austin P in Middle Tennessee, in 2 of the first 3 games, you can let him go in, not put too much on film, but just get his feet wet. And then if you need a trump card like Alabama did, that game in January, you have that in your back pocket if you just need a complete change of pace.
God, I really don't want to pull. I don't want to have to go to the back pocket if you need to. I'd rather have.
You don't want to win on that bullshit.
God, I don't want to win on that bullshit. Let's talk about the defense. We'll start up front. You already mentioned the returning upperclassmen. My biggest question now on the defensive line is going to be that depth, because as far as the recruiting ones, they've been across the board, but I didn't see as much focus on the defensive line. Am I overblowing a non-concern?
Probably. They bring in that Jay Hayes, who's a Notre Dame grad transfer. So, I mean, he'll probably be solid, but definitely not spectacular because, Notre Dame. But then you look across it, David Marshall was a linebacker last year. He's going to play on the defensive line. Malik Herring, you've got names, but you don't really have that top end talent. Guy I'm most interested in is Devontae Wyatt. He's an absolute monster of a junior college guy, 6'4", 310. Apparently he has turned some heads just from what I read basically on Twitter. So there's that. That's all I'll say is there's that. But you're starting 3 men in Ledbetter, Rochester, and Clark. That's a pretty solid unit. And again, I mean, their job's really to keep the linebackers clean more so than to create havoc plays.
All right, next up, this position group, we've already kind of touched on the linebackers. Obviously, big losses are across there, but I do think that while you can't replace a Roquan Smith, you can have an indoctrinated 4 up there who are going to be able to make the fast decisions and make the big stops and the big plays. And also, I think that we won't see, like, it was very rare last year, but there were defensive busts. I think year 2 in the system will clean up a lot of those mental mistakes. That should close the gap on the physical difference. Because, like you said, there's none of these kids. They're all very good. None of them's Lindsey Carter. None of them's Roquan Smith. But I think that another year with Mel Tucker at the helm and these kids bought in, because you can't argue with results. You say, oh, kids don't want to be coached. Kids want to be coached by winners. And guess what they did last year? They won a lot. Defensive backfield, I'll let you handle this because you played it. You know it better than I do. But I'll tell you what, I love the mentality of we're going to be bigger, stronger, and we're going to do basically that Bama 2-man and dare you to try to beat us in man one-on-one.
And then we're going to knock the shit out of you if you come across
it. Catch it. Oh, my God. You're going to wish you hadn't caught it.
Yeah, J.R. Reed, he was a guy I had no idea who he was coming into last season. I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And, finished his second team all SEC. He was one of the reps at Media Day. He's an absolute just a jackhammer out there at safety. And then the guy I'm kind of excited to see is Richard LeCount. He was, kind of the first big recruiting win for Kirby Smart, but kind of a smaller safety. He got a lot of comps to Eric Berry coming out of high school. If you have that combination where you have a slobber knocker and a ball hawk, man, that could be fun. And then you mentioned your love for DeAndre Baker. The biggest concern I've got is who's going to play that other corner spot. And they're definitely talented names. You mentioned one of the fresh, what is it, Tyson Campbell, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, you have Tyson Campbell, you have Mark Webb, who was a big recruit in his own right. My dude Amir Speed, who I mentioned, the 6'3" corner. Um, there are a lot of names there, and basically what you have, kind of as I mentioned with the offensive line earlier, you have guys who are improving from year one to year two, and somebody will step up and take that role. I don't know who it is yet, though.
Did you know J.R. Reed is Jake Reed's kid?
Really?
I feel old as shit right now. I just had a moment. Wow. Jake Reed, for those who don't know, was a receiver for the Vikings in the 90s. It was Carter and Reed before Moss got there. They accumulated yards, and wow, that's,
It
yeah.
was Carter, Moss, and Reed on the original NFL Blitz.
Yep.
Wow.
And his son's
I feel
now
old.
knocking heads for Georgia. We old. Special teams, Rex Specs. Welcome back, brother. Like, I think this is the year where we get Rodrigo run an All-American, you think?
I've he would have to be on the short list for the Groza. There was always kind of that unpredictable nature to Rodrigo, just because I think it was more because we have psyched ourselves out as Georgia fans with special teams. But Blankenship is just
Fair. It's not our fault.
it is not. But he's just ice cold at this point, man. I've got no qualms with anointing Rex Bex as the next great kicker. But my bigger concern is at punter, where Nizelek, the guy from your alma mater, the Columbia Lions, I want to say,
See you.
he came in and was just a stud as a punter last year. So I guess
You know why I'm not worried about the punter?
do what? Why is
No,
that?
I'm not worried about the punter because, oh my God, this offense looks scary. Like, that's really what it is. Like, I didn't even mention the punter that he's like leaving because I was like, I don't know what a pressing going concern punter is going to be.
And what
And
I was
maybe that's cocky.
and what I was going to say, just to finish it up, I was going to say, just don't punt. I mean,
It seems to be the answer.
it's a
Well,
good answer to me.
it's a great answer. We've got two more things to do. We've got our game by game breakdown. We're going to quickly make some picks. And I've also got some questions that came in on the Instagram. Make sure you guys follow me on Instagram at dpalm66. When we do pods like this, I'll make sure to ask questions before we record. You can get your questions in. But let's go through the game by game real quickly. Starting off with, I believe it's Austin P. Is that who we're starting with?
Yeah, that's a football game.
I'm going to go ahead and mark it as a win.
Okay, that's fair.
All right, I think that's fair. September 8th, they're headed to South Carolina. Not yet. Not yet, South Carolina. We're not there yet. And again, I think it's interesting that South Carolina fans are clamoring for this new era and blah, blah, blah. The best you've ever been was second in the East.
And here's the thing about, and I wanted to make a point about this. South Carolina went 9-4 last year. That's great. They beat Michigan. Wonderful. They won games against Louisiana Tech by 1 point. Wofford, they won 31-10, but they were up 4 points in the third quarter.
Sure.
A shitty Florida team they only beat by 8 at home.
Very shitty.
Even worse Tennessee team they beat by 6 on the road. Vanderbilt they beat by a touchdown. NC State they beat by a touchdown. If South Carolina fans start chirping at you, man, just laugh at them. Just laugh at them.
No, they know better at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's Muschamp ball, so Georgia might win it ugly 26-14, but they'll win it.
Next up, we're home again for MTSU. We're going to mark that as a win. They recruited me.
Nice.
Next, they're headed to Mizzou, a place that's kind of been a problem. Like, even when Mizzou hadn't been great, Georgia hadn't necessarily played great there. I think that rust is off, and I think they blow the doors off Mizzou because that program has fallen on hard times. It's amazing what happens when you, as a school, openly back racism against your student body, and players may not want to go there. Crazy.
It's interesting how it works that way. They did kind of hit a second gear on offense. Second half of last year, once Drew Lock kind of got comfortable, they put up 28 points at Georgia, and then the next 6 weeks went 68, 52, 45, 50, 45, 48. They lost their offensive coordinator, but they might put a slight scare into Georgia for a while before the Dogs pull away. But
I'll say this: look at those point totals against those other teams after Georgia, and I'm like, well, that explains why I'm not scared because I know that Mel Tucker can scheme for them.
Well, what you would want to say is name those teams.
Well, that's the truth too. But you know what? You can go against RBAs and you're not going to score that many points all the time. So I want to give them some credit, like you said. But at the same time, I think this is a Georgia team that has that number as far as the explosive elements of that offense. And I think they've got the size on the outside to deal with some of those weapons that Mizzou's bringing back. Next up, they're home for Tennessee. I hate Tennessee. Honestly, there are very few teams I hate more than Tennessee, and one of them is Florida. But they're going to beat Tennessee, and I'm going to that may be my game this year. I would try to go to one game a year. That would be the one.
I've been offered a ticket to it, so I might join you.
We'll talk off air on that one. That's actually put a pin on that. Next up, home for Vandy. Vandy's fine.
They're fine. I don't know where I heard this. Apparently, they lose a lot off their defense. In which case, that's going to be a shame for Vandy.
Less than fine then. Okay, so let's talk about this game October 13th, which at LSU, which is probably going to be at night.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever been to a game at LSU?
I've never been to a night game. I went to LSU Auburn 3 years ago for a buddy's bachelor party.
See, I really want to go to that game.
Ooh, I went to a game where I watched Leonard Fournette beat up on a bad Auburn team. I can't imagine going there with those people after a day of drinking and watching a close football game, let alone a game that I'd probably be wearing Georgia regalia, and I know you have no shame or sense of personal danger, so I know you would too. Chad, I've seen you at football games. Maybe not this one, brother.
I've mellowed. You haven't seen me at football games since like 25. I've got 3 in front of my age at this point.
Fair enough.
Have we been to a football game together before that?
I'm sure we have. Anyway,
just gonna call you out right quick.
Let's talk about our 20s. Let's talk about our 20s. Everything's kind of hazy. I think Georgia wins it. I think LSU. I think they made a mistake in the coach at Ohio. Honestly, I think that they're going to plateau pretty quickly, and the fact that recruits are leaving Louisiana for Georgia is not a great sign.
Yeah, it's I was happy that Coach O got hired, but
I was happy for him. I didn't think it was good for the program.
I thought it could have. I mean, in the 95th percentile outcome, it was going to work out great, but in like the 93rd percentile outcome, it was exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah. Next up, the world largest outdoor cocktail party in Jacksonville, Florida versus Florida Blowout Central. For the record, this is 2 very notably usually pessimistic Georgia fans who have casually got Georgia at 8-0 coming out of the cocktail party.
So casually, and and my thing is, you look at Florida and you think, oh man, they're going to have a really solid defense. Maybe they force a couple turnovers, make this game ugly, and keep it close. And then the other hand, you can say, hey, Mullen's the best thing that's happened to their offense since Tim Tebow. But when you gel the two and you look at the fact that Georgia just got off beating a Mississippi State team that we were all nervous about last year, 31-3.
I want to make that very clear. Going into that game, I haven't listened to that podcast since it happened, but I guarantee it's not a very cocky podcast.
I know on Dude You podcast, I called it a loss.
Yeah. It was one of my, I think, top for me last year.
So at this point, you have probably in year 1 a less than optimal Dan Mullen offense, which will still be an improvement over whatever the hell they've been running. Their defense has kind of cratered in the last 18 months or so to where they were basically nationally average last year. Mm-hmm. That combination is scary for Florida, and Georgia put it on 42-7 last year. I think Florida gets a touchdown closer, but that's just because 42-7 was mean.
I think another thing about that defense that made them look so pedestrian last year was that the offense was just so putrid that the defense, if you look at the time possession for opposing teams, it's absurd. They're on the field far too long. And while I do think there's going to be defensive drop-off, it could be buoyed by the fact that the ball, you should at least accumulate a first down a drive, maybe, hopefully. Dear God, why?
Yeah.
Okay. It would help. It would totally help. By the way, the most casual 8-0 ever. And I don't tell you, it's going to be 9-0 because then they're headed to Kentucky. And I'm a lot of things. I'm an alcoholic. I am a podcaster. I am never going to be afraid of fucking Kentucky.
Man, they have been a little bit chippy when we play at Kentucky for
No,
some
trust me.
reason.
I know intellectually that I'm wrong. I just can't muster fear. I can't. Even when we're losing late in Kentucky, I'm like, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, 2012 I was not so fine, but 2016 I think I was so checked out of the season by that point anyway that I was like, it might be fine, but I don't really care. But both times they ended up winning on a late field goal, I believe. But that's, I mean, you look at the road schedule in the SEC. You got South Carolina, Missouri, LSU, and Kentucky. Kentucky's the one that, if Georgia shit still exists, that's the Georgia game that they're going to lose.
That's the stumble coming off of the cocktail party
And
before
looking ahead
Auburn.
to Auburn.
Yeah, that's the trap game. That's a really good point. That's a really good trap game for Georgia there. Maybe I shouldn't be worried. Next up is the most probably under the radar team in the SEC, and I can't figure out why. They won the West last year. Auburn coming to Athens. I think Georgia wins. I am not relaxed because you talk about the difference in 3 weeks between the Auburn game and the SEC title game, and you're right. But if it's by that same token, that Auburn game fucking happened.
It happened, and they return a good amount on the defense, and
So
they return their they return their quarterback, which is always a thing. And I've gotten to the point where I don't worry about Auburn running backs, and they've had some serious turnover at that position, but they always find a dude who you look up in November, and he's a dark horse Heisman
yeah.
candidate.
You never know the name of the Auburn running back in August, but you know it by November.
And, probably an underrated aspect of that SEC championship game was that Kerryon Johnson was ailing. And,
Yeah.
And Georgia forced the 2 fumbles when they were moving the ball a little bit. But let's look at this. Cam Martin, Jatarvius Whitlow, Asa Martin. They got young guys. They all look a little smaller than usual, but one of them's going to be awesome.
And that's the one guarantee talking about Auburn football. Like, yeah, maybe the defense is suspect, or they brought back a bunch, we don't know. Quarterback's back, but we're not in love with him. Oh, running back, they'll be fine. What? The running backs will be fine. That's just kind of what Auburn does. Eventually, the running backs, and it's not always the same guy in August as in November. That's the other thing. It could be 2 or 3 different guys over the course of the year for them, but they'll find a guy, run that guy into the ground, and then say, oh, he can't do it anymore. Next up. And the next guy is just as fucking good. It's a little irritating, to be perfectly honest. Must be like playing us. Next up, Georgia hosts UMass. I'm not going to ask you any questions about that one. 11-0. And lastly, okay, so we're going to have a conversation about this. Because you put out a tweet last week stating that Georgia Tech might be good. How the fuck dare you? Look.
See, what I loved about that?
This year, Georgia Tech's coming to Athens on November 24th. You and I have sat here very pessimistically, and with a question mark and maybe a slight asterisk for Auburn, we got Georgia sitting at 11-0 heading into this game. Tell me why I should give a shit about Tech.
Zombie Paul Johnson.
Yo, he's running on the fumiest of fumes. Like, I cannot believe that buyout is so – it's not even prohibitive. It's just Tech's fucking cheap.
It's just at this point it's almost like Stockholm syndrome or something. But every time he goes 3-9 or 5-6, they bounce back and win 9 games the next year.
Mm-hmm.
I ain't saying that they're nearly talented enough to beat this Georgia team, but I'm saying that, and like I was being genuine with that article that I wrote on TarHeelBlog.com. If y'all want to go read up on the Yellow Jackets. I think they surprise in the ACC Coastal, whatever surprising in the ACC Coastal looks like. But they ain't beating Georgia in Athens again. That's not happening again.
Everyone tells me how good this option fucking offense is, and it is very good. And if he catches you off guard, you're pretty much fucked. But it's not catching anyone off guard anymore. And 2, it's physical as all hell. So if you're gonna tell me that by the end of the season, this Georgia team's got to worry about a physical option team, this Georgia team, no, I'm good. No,
and not to mention that Georgia, has a bye week the week before. Yes, UMass, you are a bye week. Come at me, any and all UMass followers listening to this podcast.
At Chad_Floyd on Twitter. That's where you can find him. Direct all your anger towards him. Goodness gracious. Coming after UMass. We're going to have a fight with UMass Twitter on Tuesday. Goodness. All right, so we've done our game by game. We're not going to get into postseason predictions because why lie to you people and think that, we are going to be anything but biased there. Let's go to the gram, as the kids say, and look at some of the questions that came in on my Instagram story. Once again, like I said, every time we do one of these podcasts, if you have a question, I'll allow you to ask it there, and I'll read it on air. I don't have to identify you or anything. The first question we got was thoughts on the now loaded UGA backfield. And I think we covered it already on the show, but to be honest, the now loaded almost feels like damning with faint praise. When has the cupboard been bare in the running back department since Musa Smith?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, you're looking at a situation where you've got 5 guys who are probably SEC caliber. You had that last year too, I guess, with Holyfield and Harrion being 4 and 5, but it's just absurd, man.
It's one of those things where when teams are like, where do you keep your running backs from? I'm like, I get it. You should be upset. It's weird. It's not right. You're right. I don't even argue with people like, you guys have too many good running backs. You're right. We do. We've produced too many talented running backs. I don't know what to tell you about it because it's an embarrassment of riches. And they all seem to go in the first 2 rounds of the draft. It's insane. It's almost like our recruiting pitches, come play for me, you'll be a fucking millionaire. The next question we had, tougher game on the schedule, SC at South Carolina or at LSU. I'll let you go first on this one.
I've got to go LSU just because it is different and because, I mean, it's going to be a bigger game. It's definitely going to be a night game. And what I mentioned about South Carolina earlier, I think their 9-4 record last year was a little bit smoke and mirrors.
A lot of it. I agree. I think LSU is a much tougher game. The South Carolina game is tough in the positioning of it, and that is the second game of the year. The Fields From thing may not be completely decided yet. I think there'll be more questions going into the SE game, but I think that the more impactful game, the game that's going to be more reflective of the ceiling for this team is going to be LSU, because going to Death Valley at night, going to Death Valley period is no fucking joke. Going at night with those Bayou people is definitely no joke, and escaping with a win is a big statement for a program that I think in the past would take this game and not exactly show up.
Well, here's the thing. Does Kirby Smart have control of Georgia's suspensions at this point? Because the old Steve Spurrier line, Georgia's always going to have guys suspended in week 2.
I don't know if you heard, but Kirby Smart had that bill pass where no information comes out on arrest for like a calendar year. Kirby's doing just fine in Athens on the police front. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Last question we had: how would Georgia break your heart this year? And this is a fun one because, like, we can have a very casual 12-0, 11-1 conversation, but let's be very real here. This is a team that historically has stabbed us in the face. Mm-hmm. So, where are the places on the schedule that you see most apt for stabbing? I'll go first here. The 2 places that I'm most worried about is the Kentucky game. Now that I've figured out what a track game it is, I'm worried about that game now. Not about Kentucky, just about the game. And then going to LSU. Just weird shit happens. Those are the places where I think it hurts me. Actual heartbreak, would come, and this isn't me being cocky, it's just looking at the schedule, being honest. Actual heartbreak can only come for me in the postseason.
Yeah, LSU does not bother me at all. That's honestly,
if that's a loss, it's not going to break my heart. That's okay.
If you want to be perfectly honest, that's the least important game on the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Because you win out, otherwise you're still right in the national title hunt. You've won the East, and for me, heartbreak is only defined by, like you said, postseason failure, but I'll take it one step further. Postseason failure against Alabama. I can handle a loss to Clemson. I can handle a loss to Ohio State. In the semifinal, maybe you'll be back. If it's a loss in the finals, that's going to hurt a little bit more because you start to get the Buffalo Bills syndrome. But a postseason loss to Alabama is heartbreak for me.
That's fair, and I think that we're in a place now as a program where we can be honest about that and say, after the events of January, where I was there, of course. I think it's just the freshest thing in our mind. It's the last football we saw this team play was a loss in the Dome or in the Mercedes-Benz Astro, whatever they call it. I think you're 100% right that the Bama ghost is there, and whether it be in an SEC title game or on a larger stage, it is not a situation where we feel entirely comfortable. And, I think that is the ripest place for true, real, unadulterated heartbreak that we talk about in the sports setting so often. That
Never
is our
comfortable
very
until zeros are on the clock.
Oh, and even then, you got to make sure there's no one making you come back onto the field. Chad, man, tell everyone where to find you.
At Chad_Floyd on Twitter. If you want to find me writing, I have more or less tried to take over just exclusively the football side at TarHeelBlog.com on the SB Nation network. And you say, Carolina football, that doesn't sound like much fun to write about. Well, newsflash for you, dear listener, it's not. But my ramblings on Twitter have been a little bit rarer, which has, I think, improved the quality a little bit at least. I don't know.
Well, dude, I do appreciate you coming out and giving us a little insight into the upcoming Georgia football season. Hopefully we can come back here and laugh at even our smallest of doubts and not say that, why are we so cocky? All everyone's knee exploded in the third game of the season. Again, podcast week rolls on. Tomorrow we'll be back with the Power 5 preview with Mike Felder. That was your show. This is your show. See you guys tomorrow.